Today I have the pleasure to talk to you about some of the work we have done in the unit, but also together with external researchers. And of course I will put everything in the current policy context and will also mention some hopefully new ideas that could spark some discussion on technology complexity. So let me first set the broad international scene. I guess these figures more or less look familiar to you. So in the left panel, we look at public R&D investments, Europe in comparison to other regions in the world. And in the right panel, we look at business R&D intensity. So when we look at public R&D intensity, Europe is doing quite well. So Europe is the turquoise block. The UK is doing somewhat better here in terms of public R&D intensity, but also South Korea is on the lead. Although I must say the position of Europe has somewhat decreased. So our public R&D intensity is going down a little bit over a 10-year period. On the right-hand side, the well-known fact that business R&D intensity is low in Europe. So we are the lowest in comparison to the other regions, with mostly Japan, US and South Korea being much more advanced, much higher private R&D spending, which obviously has the focus on application and valorization of knowledge. So a bit of a similar story when you look into more detail into venture capital, which is needed to scale new innovations. So in the left panel, we look at different forms of venture capital, like early stage, seed stage and later stage venture capital, EU versus the US, and we see that mostly in the late stage phase, Europe is doing much worse than the US. And maybe a similar fact when you look at unicorns, so startups that reached $1 billion phase. The EU has about 90 of these unicorns, while US and China are way ahead of us. So this figure appeared in the Draghi report and was also produced for our flagship report, I would say, in the unit, the Science Research and Innovation Performance of the EU report. This is the 24 edition. Next summer, the 26th edition will come out. So R&I challenges in Europe. Last years, there were two big reports that kind of set the policy scene. It's the Letta report, Much More Than a Market, which came out April 24, and the Draghi report, which was already mentioned earlier, that came out in September. So basically the Letta report is about the fifth freedom, the 28th regime, to kind of make it easier for firms to do business in other parts of Europe, and in short, strengthening the single market. The Draghi report is really about competitiveness, how to strengthen Europe's position vis-à-vis other parts in the world. And also in these reports it was mentioned that European R&D spending is stagnating, labor productivity growth is low also compared to the US, and regulatory disparities hinder cross-border cooperation and scaling of innovations. So these were kind of central messages in the reports. So the European Commission has transformed these messages from Letta and Draghi into a strategic document, the Competitiveness Compass, which came out in January this year. And four main challenges were identified in this compass. Fragmentation of research and innovation ecosystems. So the R&I landscape is fragmented by national borders and differences in regulatory regimes. Inefficient allocation and dispersion of R&I funding. So we do too many things with a relatively low budget. which kind of dilutes the R&I activities and also leads to underfunding of high potential domains. We are not so good in the translation from research to market. So we have difficulties to turn research outputs into scalable innovations. I already have shown you also the differences in venture capital funding. And finally, skills mismatches. So there is a mismatch between the skills that the education system is producing and the skills that we need for high growth sectors. So in the R&I policy debate, there is also a shift towards complexity. So you could say a bit in a more abstract way that past policies focus on broad, wide, generic, horizontal support, emphasis on output indicators, patterns, publication counts for a quick assessment of the effectiveness of innovation systems. But this misses some key differences in innovation quality and underlying capabilities also at regional level. And it gives limited guidance for strategic or transformative interventions. So the new approach, also advocated by Draghi, is to have this emphasis on quality-based and context-sensitive indicators and complexity-informed insights. And this would enable a more impactful policy-making process. This may all sound a bit abstract, but I will come with some case studies later in the presentation. So this shift to complexity, so complexity basically captures how innovation outputs are embedded into broader national and international innovation systems. And this gives a more nuanced understanding of technological progress and innovation processes. And this kind of complexity insights can be used in the current situation. So it will help us to implement policies that leverage existing capabilities and also reduce the risk of failed investments. And also the focus on high potential areas for impact leads to a better allocation of scarce resources and investments in skills and infrastructure. It also helps for the future, so these insights from complexity can help build a forward-looking perspective, creating environments that support transitions into new domains. And the development of policies that can evolve in response to new challenges and opportunities. So now a few illustrations of what we mean by this complexity. So for example, I mentioned already the fragmentation of the EU landscape when it comes to cooperations across research entities. So we see indeed that the R&I landscape in Europe, there is obviously cooperation, but often it stays within countries. And when we cooperate internationally, it's often with the region in the neighboring, the neighboring region in the country, in the other country. So distance matters basically. But there is this burden of knowledge concept. So it's hard for individuals to innovate alone, especially when it comes to more complex technologies. You have to work together and to mobilize expertise, knowledge that can be scattered around in different places. So the knowledge you need is rarely found just in one place. So what we see in Europe is indeed there are interconnections, but they are often somewhat limited by distance, with a few exceptions, such as Paris, München, London, who really are well connected to international networks. And in the US, the networks are much more, are less determined by distance. So you see these strong interconnections between, say, Seattle, San Francisco, Boston, Chicago. So it's a much deeper network, if you want to call it like that. The second case I would like to talk about is technological sovereignty. So this openness could also create some tensions when it comes to security issues. And we have to face this trade-off and to deal with it in a careful way. And we already see that global value chains are being reshaped due to this focus on reducing reliance on imports, basically, and also boosting national innovation systems. These security issues obviously also play a role how to safeguard our critical technologies. And maybe also one of the novelties now in the framework programs. So we have now Horizon Europe, which is our EU framework program for research and innovation. There is basically traditionally a strong distinction between civil use and defense use, and the framework programs were only for civil purposes. But now there is this stronger interest in dual use applications, basically, which basically means that research can have applications for civil use, but also for defense use. And the framework program is opening up for these dual use applications for research and innovation. This is also a graph produced in our team that also ended up in the Draghi report. It's a complicated graph, but I will just tell you the basic intuition. So on the vertical axis, we measured the complexity of technologies. For example, Internet of Things is among the most complex technologies, artificial intelligence also. On the horizontal axis, we have the relatedness density, which basically says that how easy or difficult it is to move in a somewhat different technological field. And the bubbles give the size of the specialization. So we see blue is Europe, orange is China, and gray is the US. The message here is basically that Europe is not so good in the most complex technologies. We are better in the green technologies, which are a bit more to the bottom. The US and China are much better in the most complex technologies. They have stronger specialization in these technologies. And they also have and that also makes it easier for these countries to step into closely related complex technologies. The third case and last case I want to mention is supply chain dependencies. This is a graph. This is ongoing work on semiconductors. Basically, the message here is that we are in Europe quite dependent for our imports for low complex products. The short story is that we need raw materials in Europe for semiconductors, and we don't have them ourselves. So we depend on other regions in the world for that. So these were some examples of how complexity can inform policy decisions. Lastly, the last topic I would briefly want to touch upon is technology adoption, which is, I think, a topic that deserves even more attention. Adoption is crucial for firms, governments, and households, obviously, to valorize the R&I efforts and to boost productivity. And unequal adoption of technologies can also exacerbate income differences in societies and make it more difficult to reach other objectives, such as green objectives. But it can be quite costly. So the cost of adoption is difficult to measure. But you can imagine that in a firm, if you want to work with AI, it's not just buying the software, but you really have to overhaul your whole business model. And that can be quite difficult. And this can also depend on the prior knowledge already available in the firm. And I want to say a few more words on artificial intelligence as a general purpose technology. So it's useful across the board, basically, and you don't know exactly in which sectors AI innovation will mostly take place. But it has not only a productivity effect, but also a displacement effect. So it could be that AI leads firms to kind of reduce the labor force in the company, which could lead to resistance. So this is a survey we recently conducted in Europe across all EU countries, but also the US and Turkey and some other countries. So basically, this graph shows the fraction of firms adopting AI, and we look also at the firm size class. So what is interesting is that in Europe, we see that the bigger firms do more frequently adopt AI. So there is this firm size premium, but it's a bit modest. The US is much more pronounced. So in the US, almost 80% of the firms of the big firms are adopting AI in their company. And even for the small firms, the smaller firms are adopting more often AI than the big firms in Europe. So this, I think, is a quite worrying picture. So finally, to conclude, EU's position in the global R&I landscape is being challenged. We are well aware of that. We have benefited a lot from the work by Letta and by Draghi and by some other institutes as well. And these reports have left their stamp on EU R&I policy thinking to strengthen research and innovation and competitiveness. The challenges are complicated, multifaceted, and they call for adaptive and forward-looking approaches that can also capture the interconnectedness of innovation ecosystems. Complexity analysis and this concept of relatedness can be powerful tools in our view to understand and help improve R&I policies. And one of the challenges is also that R&I activity is by its nature quite concentrated in certain firms, in certain regions. But we have to make sure that the benefits are equally shared. So this inclusiveness component is quite important because if not, then resistance to new technologies may also increase. And next to research and innovation as such, across the board adoption of new technologies is essential. And this tech adoption is gaining attention in the policy debate. We have a startup and scale-up strategy in Europe, which is now also working more on tech adoption and more specifically regulatory sandboxes. You might have heard about this. This is some form of policy experimentation where you kind of investigate the role of regulation for adoption of technologies. So it's a kind of a safe space to kind of learn what works and what doesn't work. And then when you find something that works, you can scale it up to make sure that you are using public money in the most efficient way. Thank you very much.